Ina mana ina reor e rorangatirama, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Nicholson tōku ingoa, te whare te tumu whakarai tupua, te whare wananga o tākou, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, my name's Helen Nicholson, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the University of Otago for this special inaugural professorial lecture to mark the promotion of Tania Cassidy to Professor. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Tania's many family and friends who've joined us this evening, either in person and online. And I'd like to welcome Tania's niece, Georgia, who's travelled from Canada to be with us. And to give a very special welcome to Tania's mother, Yvonne, and also to wish you a very happy birthday. Congratulations. It's just really special that you can be here to celebrate this very auspicious occasion, so thank you. So inaugural professorial lectures are certainly one of the best parts of my week, and they provide a great opportunity to learn more about our talented researchers and to showcase the excellent research that takes place across the university. Now, many of you will have heard me say that promotion to professor at Otago is not easily achieved. It requires an academic to show excellence and leadership in teaching, research and service. And Tania, as we will hear, has demonstrated all of these. As you'll shortly hear, Tania's research expertise lies in the area of sport pedagogy and the interconnections between the coach and the athlete. And as any good academic should, she's not been afraid to challenge existing orthodoxies. Tania has taught across a range of papers in the school and undertaken a significant role in designing and implementing new papers. As well as being an excellent researcher and teacher, she's applied her expertise to real-world situations, providing guidance to many codes of sporting practice, both in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and internationally. Tania, you've made a significant difference to our local and wider communities. So congratulations on your well-deserved promotion. I'm very much looking forward to your lecture, and I'd now like to invite Professor Richard Barker, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Division of Sciences, to provide a formal welcome and introduction to Professor Cassidy. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Professor Nicholson, tēnā koe. Professor Cassidy, tēnā koe. Associate Professor Hargraves, tēnā koe. Professor Jackson, tēnā koe. Friends and colleagues, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Tania Cassidy from the School of Physical Education, Sport and Exercise Science, to give her inaugural professorial lecture here at the University of Otago. As indicated by Professor Nicholson, Tania was promoted to Professor in February of this year, and tonight we get to celebrate this significant achievement. Professor Cassidy is a local, born in Dunedin and spending the first 10 days of her life in what was once Queen Mary Maternity Hospital and now Hayward College. She grew up in Mosgiel and attended Tyree High School. She must have had good teachers because she began her career as a teacher, having gained her Diploma of Physical Education at the University of Otago, thereby joining the esteemed ranks of the Fedders, before gaining her teaching diploma from Christchurch Teachers College. After nearly a decade of teaching, Professor Cassidy obtained her Master of Physical Education from Otago in 1995, and then her PhD from Deakin University in 1991. Previously a part-time teaching fellow in the PE school, Tania returned to the university in a permanent role of lecturer in 1998. I was also in the 1998 intake, and I recall taking part in the HED session on Introduction to Teaching at the university with Tania that year, and I think your presence was about the only thing I remember from that session. Not that it was a bad session, but it's just a long time ago. Having risen through all of the academic ranks at the university, we now celebrate Tania's promotion to full professor, a great achievement. As we have heard from our Vice-Chancellor, promotion to Professor at the University of Otago is far from easy. It requires excellence in all three academic domains of research, teaching and service, and each of these Professor Cassidy has excelled. In research, Professor Cassidy is an international thought leader in sport pedagogy. This is a field that she has herself grown through the interdisciplinary perspectives that she brings. Professor Cassidy has published 2 books, 24 book chapters and 36 journal articles, and one of her books, Understanding Sports Coaching, the Pedagogical, Social and Cultural Foundations of Coaching Practice, has appeared in 4 editions and has been translated into several languages, including Welsh. Professor Cassidy's international standing is demonstrated by a recent invitation to the Research Committee of the International Council for Coaching's Excellence, first global think tank, to discuss what is coaching, one of just 4 world-renowned coaching researchers asked to be involved in this debate. A standout feature of her research has been her work with postgraduate students, having supervised 6 PhD and 15 master's students in completion, students who've gone on to be high achievers in their own right. This includes Professor Jackson joining us tonight, and another standout for me personally is local elite track and field coach Joan Merrilees, mother of our latest PVC edition. Once upon a time I took a coaching course from Joan, and so I guess that means some of that learning that was passed on to Joan flew through to me. Professor Cassidy is an excellent teacher, and in supporting her promotion, her dean drew attention to the significance of her contributions across all levels of the school's curriculum. Singled out for special attention were her contributions to the physical education and health major, which is unique among New Zealand universities. This impact extends internationally. A 2018 review of her textbook commented on the specialist underpinning knowledge that was contained within it, and that was an extremely valuable teaching and learning resource that should be core reading in any undergraduate program. In terms of service, Professor Cassidy has contributed across all levels of the university, but I want to particularly mention her service to our sports bodies. Professor Cassidy sits on the governance boards for New Zealand Hockey, New Zealand Football, Otago Hockey, Football South, and the Otago Academy of Sport. And it is here that excellence in the academic world is driving excellence in the sporting world. Motivated to make a difference, Professor Cassidy indeed makes a difference. I think that's enough from me, and it's now time to hear from Professor Cassidy herself, one of our fantastic women in science here at the University of Otago. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tania Cassidy.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko rihi te iwi, I tipu aki au, I taieri, ko Tania Cassidy aho. Welcome to my IPL and to my mother's 84th birthday party. Isn't it great to be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Happy birthday, Mum. I hope you have a great party. In the next 40 minutes or so, I'll focus on the journey that I've taken to become a professor, a journey which can't be described as stereotypical. I wish to begin by acknowledging and thanking my parents, Yvonne and the late Dennis Cassidy, for providing me with a strong foundation upon which to build my life. They were both servants of our community and served on numerous committees for over decades. And it seems to be a practice that I've inherited. As a child, if I ever had a question, I'd ask Mum, and if she didn't know the answer, then she'd inevitably say, let's go and look it up. And we'd traipse up to the lounge and look up our 2 sources of knowledge, the Junior World Encyclopedia or the Pears Cyclopedia. And if we couldn't find the answer into those books, the next port of call was the public library. Mum encouraged my curiosity for the world, and she's always been my sort of firmest supporter, even though most of the time she thinks what I'm doing is nuts. So again, I thank you for that, Mum, and I love you to bits. Growing up, Dad was the sporty parent, and he had a very strong sense of social justice. And he was prepared to call out inequities when he saw them. For example, in the 1980s, he raised questions about why some very talented rugby players from the Cook Island community weren't being selected for the Otago rugby teams. While Dad was conservative in many ways, he did have the capacity to think outside the square when it came to coaching. I remember him looking at ballet teachers to teach his forwards how to become better line-out jumpers. That was before you could lift them. I also want to acknowledge and thank my siblings, Sandra, Maria, and Alex, their partners and husbands, Daniel, Matthew, and Keith, as well as my niece and nephews, Georgia, Jacob, Gemma, Toby, Kayla, Zach, Annabella, Lewis, Greta, and Rosa. I love you all dearly, and we're a formidable team. Thank you also for being my bedrock and for my sources of inspiration. For 20 years, I had a professional studies family in the School of Physical Education. And I want to acknowledge your friendship, your collegiality, and your support. Unfortunately, this family was broken apart when we were restructured in 2017, and tonight is the first time we've all been back together again. So thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting me on this special occasion. I also want to thank the current staff of the school for your support, and especially those who supported me after the restructuring. And I really appreciated the way you made me feel welcome when I was invited back over to the other side of the school, the other side of the road. Now, you don't become a professor without engaging students, and it's lovely to see that I've got students here today from the cohort of 2024. I've taught thousands of students over the last 26 years, and they've been my guinea pigs for some of my ideas, and some of which have subsequently informed the content of my textbooks. I've also been fortunate to have quality PhD students and master's students who have been curious, reflective, and willing to question the status quo. I wish to thank all of them because our collective journeys have been enriching and in times joyous. And as you can see on this photograph on the bottom left-hand corner, this was a photograph taken at graduation last year. And it represents part of my academic whakapapa, beginning with Professor Anne-Marie Jackson, who went on to provide me with academic grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I also want to publicly thank Anne-Marie for encouraging me to apply for professor. Without her gentle persuasion, I would not have done so, and it illustrates the immense value of ako and tuakana taina. Finally, I wish to acknowledge all of you who have turned up tonight physically, as well as those who are online. I'm honoured that you can make the time for me to support me on this occasion. And it's really great to see everybody here. I thank you for being an integral part of my journey, knowingly or not, to become a professor. While you have supported me, you may not be so familiar with what I do, how I do it, and why I do it. So tonight I'm going to give you a wee glimpse into the world, my working world. I've organised the IPL into 3 sections. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the theoretical orientations of my work. I'll set the scene by providing you with some insights into my early experiences and the associated interruptions, which have undoubtedly influenced my journey to become a professor. In the final section, we'll be looking at the 4 priorities of the Professorial, which illustrate my scholarship of teaching, discovery, integration, and application. As a researcher, my work is squarely located in the qualitative community. An example of my membership of that community was the invitation I received to contribute to the Rutledge Handbook of Qualitative Research in Sport and Exercise, edited by Professors Smith and Sparks. Both of these editors are highly respected, and I've been reading the work of Professor Andrew Sparks since I was a master's student. Often international colleagues only know your work through your writing. So I was flattered that the editors, A, knew my work, and B, thought I had something valuable to offer. The topic, the title of the chapter, was challenging. But what I really enjoy about this work is the opportunity to write, and in the process of writing is to be creative and learn a lot. So I was pleased in the end of how this work came together, And I was especially happy when Professor Brett Smith said my work was a standout chapter in this book. In qualitative research, theory can take on many roles. One such role is to assist us to make meaning. Tonight, I focus my attention on how and why I use theory to make meaning of learning in a sports coaching context. Throughout the IPL, I will weave two concepts, experience and interruption, with the aim of helping you and me to make meaning of what I do, why I do it, and how I do it. In my work, examples of which are highlighted on the slide, Gary Byrne and I have suggested that our understanding of experience could be further enhanced with engaging with the concept of interruption, particularly when it's viewed as a mechanism to facilitate learning and development. Another theory I want to mention tonight is social theory of learning, because the components of this theory resonate with how I learn and the importance I place on belonging, becoming, caring, and wanting to make a difference. Hence the first part of my IPL title, learning to become ... in this case, a professor. Over the last 2 decades, scholars in the areas to which I work have represented their inquiry using a variety of narrative genres. I've contributed to this body of literature in my articles, book chapters, and books. This is the second section, and the stories I've chosen to tell tonight illustrate how my experiences, the interruptions, and my desire to belong to something bigger than just me have informed my journey to become many things, including a professor. Okay, here's my stories. Okay. On my primary school entry records, it stated when I was 5 years old that I had problems hearing. As a 5-year-old, I knew I didn't want to be labelled as deaf because there was a kid in the school who had to wear a box around his neck because he was the deaf child. So when I was summoned by the visiting deaf nurse to go for a checkup, I knew I had to pass this test. She gave me headphones to wear, and I was requested to put pegs in the box every time I heard a sound. So I worked out very early on in the piece that I could also see her shoulder move every time she moved the dial. So I assumed that I can just then look at her shoulder and put a peg in the box every time I saw her shoulder move, and therefore I'd pass. So when I went home and told Mum how clever I was at defeating the deaf nurse, she wasn't impressed and said, you know, it was not the purpose of that exercise, Tania. But the experience highlighted to me 2 things. 1 was the importance of being observant, and 2, there are many different ways of skinning a cat. And I never got to take him back to the deaf nurse. I'm still deaf, but I go. As a kid, I used to like being outside mucking around and playing sport. I gave little thought to what I would do after I left school except get a job. Staying on until the 7th form or going to university wasn't even on the radar. However, at the end of 6th form, I did apply to go to Teachers College and got turned down. That interruption made me realise that maybe I could go back to the 7th form and use that opportunity to do some other things in school, to become a little bit more well-rounded. Funnily enough, I never thought about using that 7th form year to improve my school grades. In the 7th form, my academic form was fair to middling, but at least my English teacher recognised I had potential. Thankfully, I managed to get UE accredited in the previous year, so on the advice of my phys ed teacher, I applied for the phys ed school here at Otago and got accepted into the 3-year diploma program, but not the 4-year degree. It may come as no surprise that I wasn't the most sophisticated or diligent undergraduate student. In my first year at university, like at school, I did okay in subjects I enjoyed, and in those subjects that I didn't do so well. This was reflected in my grades, which ranged from A's to E's. As I was first in family to go to university, I didn't know the language that was used in the institution or how to study, and for the first 2 years I lived at home. I also didn't know that the norm upon graduating was to get your photograph taken outside the clock tower, not on pretending to be a bat and standing on your childhood roof of the playhouse and jumping off. I didn't twist an ankle, but it was a bit of a worry. In the early 1980s, the School of Physical Education was restructuring its curriculum, and those of us enrolled in the diploma were encouraged to transfer into the degree program. I did apply, but I wasn't accepted. There seems to be a trend here. The reason given for my non-acceptance was they didn't think I could cope with the content of the degree program. I remember being gutted and feeling that they thought I wasn't bright enough to do a degree. When searching through photos for this presentation, I came across a letter that I received at the end of my second year inviting me to transfer into the degree program because my marks had improved then. I declined that offer. My rationale for doing so was if they didn't want me in the first year, they weren't going to get me at all. Reflecting on that experience 40 years ago highlights to me the role of emotions and identities have played in my journey as a learner. The letter of invitation was proof that I was bright enough to do a degree, but the emotional residue initially being declined a place influenced my interpretation of the subsequent offer. The narrative that I told myself that I wasn't bright enough to do a degree was an interruption that stayed with me for many, many years, and was a key driver for me eventually to enrol in a PhD. Upon graduating, and Bill was a teacher, one of my teachers, so thank you for coming along tonight, I did go to Teachers College and taught at Roxburgh Area School for 3 years. Teaching in a school was a monumental interruption for me. I cried every day in my first year because I didn't know what I was doing. By the third year, I wasn't crying anymore, but I realised I was only copying what other people were doing. Oh, Elaine, Roxburgh Area School. So I've got one from Taieri College, or Taieri High School, and one from Roxburgh Area School. So I wasn't crying anymore, but I was copying what other people were doing or had done, and I didn't know how to change this pattern of behaviour. So I went to London and picked up a position at a private preparatory school. At that time it was Thatcher's England, and working in the school really highlighted to me how education was viewed by some as a commodity. Key to my time out of New Zealand were the spells I spent in the Middle East and in Asia. I loved travelling in these regions because it fostered my curiosity in history, politics, and world religions, as well as encouraging me to be open-minded and calm. These experiences, okay, maybe not the calm part, have been extremely influential in my journey to become a professor. I returned home at the end of 1990 in time for the rowing season. There were no grand plans other than to go to nationals at the end of summer. And I was pretty sure I didn't want to go back teaching. I still had 1 year left of my tuition to study, a free tuition to study at university. So I thought I'd go back and study politics, history, and phenomenology of religion for a year while I decided what I wanted to do with my life. I went to an advisor who looked at my undergrad transcript and said I needed to enrol in a grad dip and go back to phys ed school. He never asked me what I was interested in, and at that time I never knew I could question him. So I duly enrolled, and in the first 2 weeks I went to the GV section of the Central Library and looked at what the PE books were on the shelves. That was when I saw Andrew Sparks' book on curriculum and micropolitics, as well as the edited text by David Kirk and Richard Tinning that linked curriculum, culture, and talked about so-called critical issues. It was then I thought that maybe I could draw on my interest in politics and history and link that with my background in physical education. I also found this quote from Wick, which has stayed with me ever since. The appeal of that quote was the freedom that the freedom to experiment could be taken seriously. Also in the GV section, I found a book by Rosalind Cassidy, no relation, entitled Curriculum Development in Physical Education, which was published in 1954. While the way Cassidy described curriculum didn't appeal, I did a photocopy of the inside page. Seeing that book with the Cassidy name on the spine must have sparked something, because I really remember thinking that one day I'm going to write a book too. That photocopied page has also followed me around for the past 30 years. Another memorable book of the time was Boyer's text, in which he outlined the priorities of the Professoriate, which I mentioned earlier and I'll return to later. At the completion of my Masters, I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was still curious to learn, and I still had a chip on my shoulder that I was still too thick to do a degree. So I enrolled to study in a PhD with Richard Tania at Deakin University in Australia. Throughout my Masters, I'd read work by staff in the Faculty of Education at Deakin, and they were challenging the status quo in education and physical education. I had a vague idea that I wanted to explore physical education from a critical perspective, but again, there was no grand plan when I jumped on the plane bound for Australia. I soon came to realise that the staff in the education faculty at Deakin University were actually international rock stars, and it was an incredibly vibrant environment. It also highlighted to me that despite having been a teacher, I knew nothing about educational theories or how to learn. And it wasn't until I was presenting my PhD proposal, maybe 8 months into my tenure, that one of the staff said, "I think what you're doing is a study on pedagogy." I'd never heard the term before, so I definitely didn't know what he meant. I soon became well versed in Lusted's definition of pedagogy, which provided a framework for my PhD. I've subsequently added to the definition by recognising the context in which that process occurs. And tonight, some of the examples I provide illustrate this pedagogical process. One of the studies, or one of the outputs from the PhD, was this paper that Richard and I wrote. The key finding of that study was that if you're attempting to challenge the status quo, there is limited chance of change occurring if the focus is only placed on the mental processes of the learner. For genuine change to occur, there needs to be emotional commitment to the change agenda. As I explained earlier, the third section of the IPL is organised around Boyer's 4 priorities of the Professoriate. I use his areas of scholarship of teaching, discovery, integration, and application to frame the stories I tell about how I'm learning to become a professor. The first area of scholarship is teaching. It was a tough initiation for me into tertiary life as a staff member. No surprise there. I had to design and teach 3 new papers in my first year. And while I received reasonable student evaluations in the 300 and 400 level papers, I got absolutely caned by the students in the compulsory Physi 201 pedagogy paper. And I think some of the people here might have actually been in one of those early papers. I always have to apologise for those first 5 years. I got better after that. The large majority of the students couldn't see why it was a compulsory paper. They absolutely hated it. This was reflected in the results for the question 5 in the student evaluation surveys, where the students were asked to rate how effective I was at teaching the paper. In 2001, only 14% of the students rated me as effective. It is worth noting that to be a very effective teacher, 100% of the students have to rate you as either 1 or 2 on that Likert scale. There was a slight improvement in 2002, with 39% of the students rating me as an effective teacher. These student evaluations were a definite interruption in my journey to become a professor. One consequence of the very poor student evaluations I received in Physi 201 was I failed to be confirmed as a tenure member of staff at the University of Otago. I had 1 more year to prove myself that I indeed was an effective tertiary level teacher, otherwise I'd be gone. Nothing like a bit of motivation. So, I need to focus. So in Physi 201, I would, and I still do, introduced the students to Dewey's notion of becoming a reflective practitioner. Emma, you can remember that. Now I had to practice what I preached. So I went back to the finding of my PhD, which illustrated the importance of the students having an emotional commitment to the change agenda. But what did that mean to me and to the students in Physi 201? I surmised that a common denominator across the student body was that most of them would have been coached at some stage of their lives. So I decided to take a punt and contextualise the pedagogical concepts that I've been talking about into a sports coaching context. I mean, what did I have to lose? They hated what I was doing already, and the student evaluations couldn't get much worse. The following year, when I introduced the class to Dewey's view of reflection, I also put up this quote from Wayne Smith, the then coach of the All Blacks, in which he was pretty much saying the same thing as Dewey. When this quote came up on the screen, the change of vibe in the lecture theatre was almost palpable. It was then I knew I was onto something. I went looking in the literature for something to support what I was doing, but I couldn't find anything. So I went and asked a colleague, Robin Jones, who was on staff at the time, and his area was sociology of sports coaching. And I asked him, could he point me in the direction of people who were writing in the area of pedagogy of sports coaching? And he said, well, there isn't anybody. To which I replied, well, there's a definite gap in the literature, and if you'd like to, would you like to help me write a textbook to support what I'm doing in Physi 201? And the rest is history. In 2004, the book was published. I was writing the book primarily to save my bacon here at Otago, but in doing so, we highlighted a number of gaps in the literature. One major gap was that there were no articles identified as focusing on the learning process or the athlete as a learner. Using our text in the compulsory Physi 201 pedagogy paper was a game changer. In 2004, the numbers of students saying that I was an effective teacher jumped to 88%. On the basis of my improved teaching evaluation, I was finally confirmed as a confirmed tenured member of staff at the University of Otago. The experience I gained in having to turn around the student evaluations has been invaluable. Nowadays, I get 98 to 100% of students saying that of course, consider me to be an effective teacher. Just remember that when you're doing the student evaluations this year. 98 to 100. When Professor Les Williams, he was the dean that appointed me, was informed that I'd finally been confirmed, he responded by saying, I'm so pleased that she's been supported. Institutions are often blind to quality in non-obvious areas. This is another quote that I've kept with me for the past 20 years. And I'll be forever grateful to Les for seeing my potential, even though it might not have been so obvious to others. As Richard said, the text has had a number of editions and has been translated into Korean and Welsh, and also as a talking book by the Norwegian Library for Talking Books in Braille. Who knew? The book has had pretty good reviews, really. And so it was ranked 66 out of 1,000 best-selling books of all time on the Routledge Sport List, and it's become considered to be a seminal coaching text for undergraduate programs. I actually think the 4th edition, which came out in 2023, is much better than the 3rd edition, so I'm looking forward to the reviews on that. The second priority for Boyer is scholarship of discovery, and I'll now provide 2 examples of how my work contributes to this scholarship. The first example begins in 2003, and it coincided with me playing around with the content of Physi 201 and writing the first edition of the textbook. Steve Martin, the rugby manager at Otago Rugby Football Union, invited me, Paul Potrak and Alex McKenzie to develop a social science theory-based coach education program for their representative coaches. Steve, who is here tonight, I did see you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Now, Steve having done this, my orientation would have been so different. So Steve, thank you. Steve's rationale for approaching us was that the Otago Rugby Union was smaller and had less financial backing than its main rivals, and therefore we had to work smarter to develop a point of difference. 20 years later, in the 4th edition of the text, we refer to this as a desire to develop a pedagogical advantage. We agreed to run what we called the Code Program, what became known as the Code Program, on the understanding that we could do two things: use the ideas that we were trialling in Physi 201 and what we were writing about in the 1st edition of the textbook, and also that I could interview the participant coaches, one of who's here tonight, thank you very much, at the completion of the Code Program about their experiences of having been involved in the initiative. Despite the participants becoming from a range of educational backgrounds, one of the findings of the subsequent study was that the majority of the coaches did not recognise the athletes as learners. This finding reflected the lack of discussion on learning in the sports coaching literature. Some of the reasons for the resultant code study was novel was because we used Fullen's framework of curriculum change to evaluate and reflect on the merits of the code program. At that point in the sports pedagogy field, no one was using educational curriculum theory to talk about or analyse coach education initiatives. The code study also differed from previous studies because we didn't try and measure the effectiveness of a behavioural approach, and we used qualitative methodology. The second example, who is also sitting in this room, thank you, Joan, is illustrated in the next two slides. My graduate students often come with considerable experience in the workforce and strength and sports coaching prior to enrolling in postgraduate study. Thus, their research questions are grounded in real-world situations, and the students are often well connected to the communities. This was the case with iconic local coach Joan Merrilees, who was interested in gaining insight into the experiences of 3 women elite performance coaches within the New Zealand track and field community. The participants in her study were vastly experienced coaches, as identified here. To make meaning of those women's experiences, Joan used Wenger's social theory of learning, specifically focusing on how they learned to become an elite coach and how this process was linked to their various identities. Some of the challenges faced by the women in Joan's study was also documented in the nation's media. One woman worked as a coach for 27 years, which included coaching at those pinnacle events, all the while being a volunteer. Another woman had a difficult time with New Zealand track and field when a relationship between her and a coach broke down. A consequence of this situation was that she went off and took up an offer in China and subsequently coached their athletes to the Olympic finals. It was 7 years later before she finally secured employment as a coach within the New Zealand national body. I highlight these stories to illustrate the importance of Joan's work, to shed light on the complex journeys women can have in the process of becoming an elite coach. Her work might help explain why women are underrepresented in the elite sports coaching community. The underrepresentation is reflected here in the figures for accredited coaches split by men and women in the Olympic Games between 2010 and 2021. Women made up 10% of coaches in Vancouver in 2010, 11% in London in 2012, 9% in Sochi in 2014, 11% in Rio in 2016, and 13% in Tokyo in 2021. The IOC celebrated the 2021 figures as reflecting a positive trend. To quote the Dixie Chicks, I'm not ready to make nice on those figures just quite yet. If we drill down into the figures for New Zealand, it's even more a sorrier state. For example, in 2012, only 4% of New Zealand coaches attending the Olympics were women, compared to the international figure of 11%. In 2021, only 6% of New Zealand coaches were women, compared to the international figure of 13%. So in New Zealand, we have even less to celebrate when it comes to women coaching athletes at the Olympic Games. It'll be interesting to see the breakdown of coaches by gender in the upcoming Paris Olympics, which begin in a few months' time, especially because I suspect the IOC will be crowing about the number of women athletes participating in the Games reaching parity with men. The third priority for Boyer is the scholarship of integration. An example of the scholarship of integration is the process we undertook when writing this textbook, Understanding Strength and Conditioning as Sports Coaching, Bridging the Biophysical, Pedagogical and Socio-Cultural Foundations of Practice. Now, doesn't that roll off the tongue? That I'm a lead author of a book that focuses on strength and conditioning continues to amaze me, because as some of you know, I don't even know the difference between my jugs and my guns. The authorship team on this book are members, which we've got 2 others tonight, so thank you, Phil and Lisette. The authorship team on this book are members of multiple and potentially disparate communities, with only 2 of them having connections to strength and conditioning. Yet all of us could see the possibilities of developing learning capabilities by establishing links across the boundaries of our various communities to the benefit of strength and conditioning coaches. We drew on Wenger's social theory of learning to understand ourselves as brokers. Working in an integrative fashion required us to be open-minded and become comfortable working outside our comfort zones. The reward for doing so was that we provided ourselves with opportunities to think and write creatively. And this appears to have been viewed favourably, at least from those in the governance level of the National, read American, Strength and Conditioning Association, as evident by the Professor Jeffrey's review of our book. In this text, we begin most chapters with narratives, with the aim of providing readers the opportunity to make an emotional commitment to our change agenda. I'd previously experimented using these types of narratives for a similar purpose 6 years earlier, when I was working with 3 other colleagues, one of whom was Anne-Marie Jackson. The 4th priority, and the last one, so hang in there, we're nearly done. The 4th priority for Boyer is the scholarship of application, and it's to this I now turn my attention. My interest in leadership came about post the 2017 restructure of the School of Physical Education, which for me, and many of the others sitting in this front row, was life-changing. One of the less dramatic changes was the management structure within the school. I became the Associate Dean of External Engagement. Holding this role, I was encouraged to attend courses offered by the Academic Leadership Development Program at the university. An unintended consequence of doing so was that I began to explore sports coaching from a leadership perspective. Oopsie daisy. Yep, so. Okay. Much has been made of New Zealand Rugby's use of the leadership group in the development of the All Blacks. Unfortunately, what I found on New Zealand Rugby's publicly available free coach education site for coaches, called the New Zealand Rugby Toolbox, did not instill me with confidence with how they understood leadership. It was full of contradictions and use of military references. So you can see there's the naval command lines, your troops. The most finest skippers are not gods, but you need a Herculean work ethic. Or the best captain is one who says very little, but a leader that says nothing isn't leading. And don't get me started on what they think about women as leaders. I don't know what a figurehead is, but never mind, we won't go there. It was inferred that this description was informed by psychology, by referencing the concept of traits. But my question is, how can coaches make sense of this if they wanted to develop as a leader, or they wanted to develop their athletes as leaders? Oh, there's Phil. Reading the work of Chin and others who challenged the established way of viewing leadership and seeing leadership potential of athletes such as Emma Raducanu were catalysts for me to think about leadership differently. Being based in New Zealand for my last sabbatical provided me with opportunities to be the critical friend of the head of female engagement at the New Zealand Cricket. New Zealand Cricket have a female leadership development framework, which informed an initiative to support their senior and aspiring female leaders. One outcome of my applied scholarship was the production of theoretically informed critical case studies that New Zealand Cricket has subsequently used in their workshops. These case studies were formed using the insights I gained from talking to the participants. Frankie was one such participant in the Aspiring Leaders Initiative. What I found interesting and was very excited to hear was why she applied for and accepted the role as Wellington Cricket's community manager for women and girls. It wasn't about cricket. Rather, it was about equity, building communities, and creating better and sustainable systems. Her background was in social work. This quote from Frankie provides insights into how and why she leads, and highlights how she tries to be explicitly disruptive at times. One alternative reading of her quote here is that it could be viewed as that she uses interruptions to facilitate learning and development. I'd like to show you a wee clip now that showcases some of Frankie's work. Yay Girls was initially designed by Frankie as a Wellington-based initiative, but it was so successful that it's been rolled out across the country. Now keep your fingers crossed. Now I want to ask you, when was the last time you saw such a vibrant cricket practice? Whoopsie daisy, that was a surprise. A wee postscript to this work. Okay, well I'll just leave that there, but don't look at it. My work with New Zealand Cricket challenges the view that Boyer's 4 priorities of the Professoriate operate in silos. New Zealand Cricket was interested in me applying my scholarship around leadership to the work they were doing with the Aspiring Leaders Initiative. But when in 2023 I gave a conference presentation in Singapore on leadership and used Frankie's story as a case study, I was subsequently invited, along with my co-author Gary Byrne, to contribute to a special issue entitled Rethinking Leadership Development, Contributions from Theory and Research. In this article, which Gary and I haven't finished writing yet, we will explore leadership as a pedagogy of interruption. This article will reflect Boyer's scholarship of discovery. So my work with New Zealand Cricket illustrates that Boyer's priorities can be complementary rather than siloed, which I think can be only a good thing if you're wanting to challenge the status quo and change practice to improve equitable outcomes. Cue that slide. Now there's no conclusion to this presentation because learning is a journey which I hope to be on until I pop my clogs, but I do have to wrap it up in somehow. So I'll do so by explaining the props I used in my IPL poster and return to Boyer's priorities for the Professoriate. My mother tells the story that when she enrolled me in primary school, the teacher asked, what was she like as a child? And she said, give her a book, a bike and a ball and she'll be happy. Well, 55 years on, pretty much, give me a book and a bike and a ball and I'll be happy. So that was the reason why I used those props in the IPL lecture, IPL photo. The coloured photographs in this slide represent another point Boyer was making when he was framing up his priorities for the Professoriate. He talked about having a creativity contract and the importance of professors retaining vitality. To illustrate his point, he quoted Henry David Thoreau, an American philosopher who is best known for his book Walden, a reflection on simple living in natural surroundings. When Thoreau was asked why he was leaving the solitary, reflective life at Walden Pond, he said, "I left the woods because it seemed to me that I had several more lives to lead." In many ways, tonight's presentation is like my living academic wake. Because for those of you who do not know, I'm taking voluntary redundancy in 8 weeks' time. I'm often asked, why am I leaving, particularly now that I've been promoted as a professor? My answer is very similar to that given by Thoreau. I feel as if I've several more lives to lead. In my post-university life, books, balls and bikes will still play a major role. I'm in the process of co-writing a children's book with Seb in the audience. I'll be playing with a ball as a consequence of being selected in the New Zealand women's 60s hockey team for the upcoming World Cup. And I'll be riding my motorbike off into the sunset. Well, all going well. Had a few falls. In addition to the books, balls and bikes is a boat, because I've recently been accepted as a volunteer watch officer on the Spirit of New Zealand. So I'll be sailing around the coast for several weeks a year. And finally, if I sit still for too long, either my nieces and nephews will ask me to do something, or my dog Rua will look at me with those big brown eyes and plead with me to take her on an adventure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excuse me. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Elaine Hargreaves, tako ingoa, ko ahau te tumiaki kei te kura para whakawai ahau e mahi ana. It's with the greatest pleasure that I conclude Professor Cassidy's inaugural Professorial lecture as the Dean of the School of Physical Education, Sport and Exercise Sciences. Tania, as she told you, began her career studying for the diploma in physical education. Hadn't quite realised she didn't make it into the degree programme, but she got the diploma. So it's fitting that she's now recognised with this professorial appointment out of that same department. The work that Professor Cassidy has presented to you today demonstrates the outstanding contribution and leadership she's made and continues to make to the pedagogy process underlying coaching practice. And as we've seen, Tania's contributions to the field stretch from the foremost textbook that undergraduate students across the world use in their studies from little old New Zealand. Her insightful research articles to the impact that our work has had in changing coaching practices within sport organisations for the benefits of athletes, but also the coaches themselves. Affectionately known as TCAS by past and present students, you'll be hard-pressed to find a sporting organisation in New Zealand that doesn't employ one of her students. From a personal perspective, when I was deciding on whether to take on this dean position, Professor Cassidy kindly said she never wanted the position herself, but I could be assured that she would always have my back, and I've appreciated her advice and support in the leadership positions she's undertaken within the school. And I can confirm that she's always had her back, and look forward to that for the next 8 weeks. As Tania mentioned, she's just been selected for the New Zealand Masters hockey team, so there's life in the old dog yet. And given her expertise, I'm not sure that I would want to take on the role of our hockey coach, so I take my hat off to him or her for taking on that role, and let's hope that they've read her book. I'm so very grateful to be able to celebrate this achievement with you, Tania, and I'll end by thanking all of you for coming to acknowledge Tania's achievements. And when we lose Tania from the department, I feel like we'll also lose her mother, who became an honorary member of staff during lockdown, who was either doing the quiz with us, answering all the questions, or writing the quiz. So we lose another staff member. thank you all for coming to acknowledge Tania's achievements, and for those watching online elsewhere in the world for showing your support. We would like to invite you to the staff club after the formal proceedings conclude to continue the celebrations. And to Tania, we have a gift for you to remember this occasion before I pass on to...
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, tēnā koutou I tēnei pō, ko Anne-Marie aho. I'm Anne-Marie, and my role in tonight's proceedings is to say a few words for Professor Cassidy on behalf of friends and whānau. Tania has been my academic mentor. Come up here, TCAS. TC. We are. TCAS she has been my academic mentor, colleague, friend and family member for over 20 years. I was actually in her class in Physi 201 back in 2001.
Probably was one of those ones that gave me
in the early days.
Well, I used to have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to...
Hey, let's just park that to the side. We've been close colleagues, as you can see, for over 20 years. And as TC said tonight, the rest is history. It's been an absolute delight to listen to your inaugural professorial lecture tonight. You've shared tonight from a place of deep humility, your experiences, I'm tearing up a little bit up here, the interruptions, your desire to belong to something bigger in this journey, the importance of disrupting the status quo, of the change agenda, and the 4 priorities of the Professoriate in this journey of becoming a professor. Now, I wish to challenge you in this positioning, and as I'm sure that we could all agree, that what you've shared tonight is not the journey of becoming a professor, rather it is that of being a professor. That is a status that you have held and you have been operating for many, many years prior to being awarded the formal title in February 24. You've always embodied the town and gown philosophy of an Otago era of days gone by, a professional studies scholar and the 3rd female professor of professional studies in the world. Thank you for giving us a positive reason today to come together tonight to celebrate you. You've always done things your own way. Your IPL, the timing is no exception. And you absolutely have, I'm getting there, it's Mum's birthday. You absolutely have more lives to lead, and your journey does not end here. And what you would say to me, watch out, kiddo, world domination. Now, I have two final tasks for the evening. Firstly, from your professional studies whānau, we've all chipped in for this taonga for you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, whānau. Thank you.
Carved by my tāpapa carver, Adrian Woodhouse, who's from Kaitahu. Yes. And so I want to acknowledge the Woodhouse whānau, who also has links to Mosgiel. And I'll read out what Adrian's written for you.
And Roxburgh.
Hey. In crafting this bespoke tauka, my aim was to encapsulate your personal narrative by weaving together elements of Te Ao Māori, a Māori world, and your life as an educator. This piece primarily symbolises taniwha matamata in the niho or tooth form, the guardians of the Taiari River and your hometown Mosgiel. The niho shape pays homage to the strength and wisdom embodied by the taniwha, resonating with your own characteristics. But beyond its aesthetic form, the niho embodies a deeper significance with its tooth shape, symbolising the journey of knowledge acquisition, representing lessons learned, challenges overcome, and steps taken towards personal growth and development. Bound together by the curves of the koru, this piece speaks to ako and the eternal cycle of learning and teaching, encapsulating the reciprocal relationship between kaiako and akonga, teacher and learner, where both are nurtured and enriched through the exchange of knowledge. The intertwining koru symbolises the interconnectedness of these roles, each supporting and nourishing the other in a continuous cycle of growth and development. Carved from the inanga pounamu, this piece is embodied with the essence of journeys undertaken afar and lessons learned. Just as rivers flow and converge, carrying stories of exploration and discovery, so too does your journey through life. The inanga pounamu serves as a reminder that while we may depart the comforts of home, when we return home, we are all the richer and wiser. Now, I wish to conclude tonight with acknowledging the people who are the most important to her, and that's her family. To her mum, Mrs. Cassidy, Yvonne. We know how much, yes, but I'll get her growing if I should. from my own mother. We know how much it means for Tania to have this IPL on your birthday as a way to honour you and your family. I wish to also acknowledge Mr. Cassidy Dennis as well, who's not here with us in person, but certainly here in spirit. Her sisters, Sandra, Maria and Alex, their partners, her nieces and nephews, the whole gang, and of course Rua. The final words of tonight are from Tania's mum, and I can just feel she'll be boring into me here from getting Tania's mum to say a few things. Thanks, Alex.
Oh.
Tania told, this is Facebook Messenger. Tania told me years ago the main reason she returned to Dunedin from her overseas work and study was she realised she needed her family around her. We are sure glad she did, because the family needs her. There have been times we have shaken our heads and rolled our eyes at some of her ideas. But one thing we can say is that life with Tania is never boring. Tania is the loudest cheerleader for everyone in our family, from our most significant achievements and milestones to our small everyday successes. Without fail, Tania is there, giving support and praise, and is constantly finding ways for us to expand upon those successes in the most genuinely supportive way. So it's so lovely for us to be able to turn the attention, the praise and the spotlight onto her and her professional achievements. Tania is naturally self-deprecating, but we hope she embraces the well-deserved honour of becoming a professor. In the years to come, we cannot wait to see how she will cajole us to do things we don't think is possible. Thank you, Tania, for pushing us out of our comfort zones. I'd like to ask Rosa and Greta if you would like to come up and to be able to present Tania with some flowers from her family.
Oh. Thank you, darlings. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're good. Here's Mum. Ready? Love you too.
And finally, our professional studies whānau have asked if they could sing a waiata as well to be able to support Tania to wrap up this part of the evening. Kia ora tātou. And people know.
Thank you very much. It was beautiful. So good. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the staff club.